Hey folks, I wanted to issue a content warning really quickly. Nothing terrible, just a couple more F-bombs and curses than we would normally have on the show. Not going to be the current state of affairs, but I just wanted to issue that for anybody who would be surprised by that suddenly happening. Also, first 4 minutes, our audio sounds a little more like hallway audio, but we managed to fix that up pretty quickly. So, other than that, enjoy the show. Folks, welcome to another one of our B-sides. I didn't expect to be doing this quickly after our Last Dragon go. Generally, we just do these every so often. But a friend of mine, God of Thunder, Man of Mystery, brother from another mother, Bobby, has written copious theses on this film that recently it's come out. And I just was like, hey, you want to get on a podcast about it? He's like, yes. So here he is, the man, the mystery, the God of Thunder himself. Bobby, how are you doing, sir?
I'm doing okay, man. It's been more than a week since I saw the movie, and so the initial speechlessness, and not in a good way, has kind of worn off, and so I've been able to move on with life. I look back and I'm like, God damn, how do you mess something up that badly? It's kind of like messing up boiling water or something. Like, it's kind of like taking instant oatmeal. Right. Where you have two ingredients: water that you either boil or heat up in a microwave with the oatmeal already in it, and oatmeal. And that's it. It's kind of like saying, well, let's add some chili powder and a couple of bananas and rotten eggs and maybe a half a bottle of Malort in there as well, in order to like spice things up and be creative and individualistic as well.
Well, what are we talking about, sir? Are we talking about, I don't know, any one of recent films that's just been dumped onto any sort of streaming service?
Oh, not at all. No, couldn't possibly be. Yeah, we are talking about the most recent Mortal Kombat movie. For anybody who wants to refer to it as a movie, I'll use that because there's not really another term, nothing friendly anyway.
Well, I'm interested to know, because you seem to be like singularly offended by this, and I've known you for almost 20 years. I'm just like, when has Bobby ever mentioned this like absolute love and affinity for this? I was just like, wait, when was this a thing?
I've a couple of things. One is I'm aware that it's just a movie, and a bad movie is a bad movie, and life goes on. It's not like it's gonna keep me from surviving or breathing or anything like that. At the end of the day, it's just a movie, and it's not my screw up,
Right.
But at the same time, I know that there are many people, I happen to be one, who had been waiting for this movie or a version of this movie probably for more than 20 years. I would fathom since Mortal Kombat Annihilation, that friggin' abomination from 1997. I'm someone who liked the original movie, the 95 movie. And
I just recently watched it in full because I always like caught it on cable or like caught it on TV like halfway. So it's like I always kind of knew what happened in it, but I didn't watch it until like probably a day or two later from watching this recent one, and it was like, what?
Yeah. Like, well, that one's.
How did it take you like 25 years to like not do it better?
Yeah. And that's the thing. Like this new one had everything going for it, and they completely dropped the ball. Not only did they drop the ball, they like decided to spike the ball into a mud puddle and then like piss, shit, and throw up in it all at the same time.
That's what I think what we were talking about was like, from a production value perspective, it's not annihilation. It's not degrading in quality. The quality, the filmography, the CGI, mostly the cast, everything's there. That should be there.
Yeah, they had the right ingredients and totally screwed up. And this, just jumping back, because there are going to be people who would retort and say, "Well, you're not a real fan." There are people who I don't really know where this mentality comes from. Let me restate that I do. It's just disappointing.
Right.
We're back.
Yeah, we're back and better than ever. You were talking about like people were complaining about you not being a real fan of this if you're complaining about it, but you seem to have some sort
Yeah,
of take back at that.
yeah. There are a fair number of people who have been kind of firing back at people critiquing the movie and saying, "Well, you're not a real fan of the games or anything. All I wanted was some fatalities and some violence to look at, and every now and then they throw in that they wanted some good fights." This isn't everybody, by the way. I'm very well aware this isn't everybody, but a fair number of people kind of had that as their retort for anybody who had any kind of a constructive critique about this movie. And as I said a minute ago, and I'll get into this in better detail in a few minutes, but spoiler alert, the fights themselves, almost all of them were not very good. And even the fatalities, there were like one or two outlying ones that actually looked pretty good. And the others either looked really cheap or just didn't exist in the movie. So there really weren't that many quote unquote fatalities. And the ones that we got were not well earned, so to say. There wasn't a really good fight leading up to those moves. All right, I'll get into that in better detail in a second, but I don't want to get too sidetracked.
Right.
The main thing is there are people who kind of either don't realize or maybe don't want to realize that even though the first couple of games were very basic, more and more games developed over time, and there was a lot of lore and story added to those games and a lot of character given to the characters. So they weren't just kind of slots to fill in. It wasn't like, oh, this person looks cool, let me use them. After a while, they actually developed personalities for those characters and backstories. And I find it kind of insulting that people will kind of one-dimensionally think, oh, it's just a mindless fighting movie. And don't get me wrong, there are quite a number of mindless, turn your brain off style, good, bad movies that I'm a big fan of. And they sometimes will be action movies. More times than not, they'll be low-budget horror movies, many of which I got in my collection. But those are the movies where, like, what you're going in for, and it's not necessarily supposed to have a well-written story. This was something coming from a series of games developed over decades, where there was now all of a sudden a good amount of lore to pull from.
Yeah, you had what, 20 years between the first one, which was what, drawing on one or two games?
Yeah, the first movie came out when only parts 1 and 2 of the games were out. And so they didn't have as much to work with. In fact, a lot of the story that was added to the first movie helped shape the other games afterwards.
Plus,
it wasn't well, that song existed a long time before the movie came out. It was at least a year or two old before the movie came out. There was a separate track, separate CD that came out from a techno group called the Immortals that did that. And they just pulled it for the movie because it was too good not to. Right. It was like can't not use it. Side note, it drives me insane when people try to sing the Mortal Kombat song, but there's a very similar sounding house or techno song from that same era that they end up singing instead and not even realizing. I'm like a fan of the game series since the first one. I first played these games when the very first game was only available in the arcades. It wasn't even out on the home consoles yet. And I have to go to like local sporting goods
$45 or whatever.
Yeah, well, more than that. If I remember correctly, I think they were more like $70 or something like that. Because they came out on Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis, Game Boy, and Game Gear. Those were the ones that it came out on first, and then eventually came out on Sega CD also. I was a Super Nintendo guy, so I had it on that. But and unfortunately, the Super Nintendo version took out the more violent fatalities. They learned their lesson and left them in for part 2 when that came out. There's this weird stigma to where it's like, people think, oh, if you want the lore and the story, that you don't want the gore and the violence in there. It's kind of, well, you can have both. I'm really racking my brain trying to figure out why there's this weird divide in someone's thinking process that you can't have that you have to have one but not the other.
Because of course there's no story that doesn't have no good story out there that doesn't have gore and violence in there.
Exactly.
It says every freaking war movie, fighting movie, cop drama, martial arts movie.
Volume 1 and 2, the Raid movies, The Night Comes For Us, and a number of other very low budget movies that sometimes had a good story and sometimes did not.
Generally, and like the story is told like via the fights and stuff like that. That's
part of the language a lot of the time.
Yeah, and it was what the Mortal Kombat's about. I mean, and that's what differentiates it from Street Fighter.
Well, and
if you try to tell me it's like what's the difference between Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat, I'm like maybe one
there was a
doesn't
lot
have powers.
more backstory.
Yeah.
There was more backstory and more mysticism in Mortal Kombat. I like Street Fighter as well. There was just a certain thing about the Mortal Kombat lore and look and storytelling over the course of the games, and also the first movie for that matter, that kind of kept me coming back for more, a little more so than the Street Fighter games. And the fatalities were part of that, but they weren't the be all and end all. They like you can't just have that as a gimmick and nothing else. And I kind of feel like this movie, the recent movie, was trying to do that in order to lure in fans. Like, oh, we've got fatalities, and they used that as the carrot to kind of dangle in front of everybody. But there was no other substance to the movie whatsoever, which is really unfortunate because there were some very talented individuals in the cast, particularly Joe Taslim as Sub-Zero and Hiroyuki Sanada as Scorpion.
Well, and that's the thing. They get this like opening scene. It felt like it was a different movie. Like it just felt like they get this opening scene that's just great. There you go. All right, cool. All right,
we're back.
Sorry, after 2 interruptions. So, I mean, because the beginning scene is like just wonderfully crafted from a fight choreography. It's not a lot heavy on the CGI, and once it uses the CGI really practically,
and it's kind of sparingly, which I liked. You know, it wasn't overkill. And I agree with you. I've said this. It felt like that opening scene was recorded by a completely different film crew, who then left the rest of the movie to like a bunch of interns who'd never filmed the movie before. And like somehow or another, Hiroyuki Sanada and Joe Taslim were just like contractually obligated to film the rest of their parts and tried to stay out of the rest of the movie as much as possible because that was the thing too.
Why then does the focus need to be on
Mr. Generic?
This new, hey, look, the guy who plays him,
Louis Tan.
Yeah, Louis Tan. He's kind of been screwed by like a bunch of different, like the Iron Fist Netflix show. He got screwed by, like he was in like a couple other stuff.
He was in Into the Badlands, and he was actually quite good in that.
And then they just give him like, I'm an MMA fighter. He's not as good as he used to be.
Well, yeah, and like that's
and I got a family.
It's not his fault. The character was really poorly written, and the entire movie was poorly directed. Like that's not a fault to him either as a martial artist or even as an actor for that matter. If you're given shit to work with and probably even told to play it the way that he played it, it's that's really not his fault. I've seen bad movies, good bad movies, the ones that are like, oh, this is supposed to be shitty, and that's part of the charm. This is not one of those movies, but I've seen those types of movies and found out behind the scenes that a lot of the actors were deliberately directed to overact. In this case, they were directed to underact, it seems. Like directed to do something to where it like was totally contradictory to, yes, this is good act. That seemed to be the case for a lot of the actors. It seemed like so many of them wanted to do a lot more, but were kind of like held back in this sense. It seemed like the one guy that they kind of let off the leash a little bit was Kano, but they still messed that character up quite a bit. I'll get back to that in a sec. We were talking about Louis Tan, but yeah, he's actually a very talented martial artist. And he probably is a good actor as well. I mean, I thought he was pretty good at Into the Badlands. And
he did the best he could with what he had.
Yeah, like when you're given a shit sandwich, the most you can do is maybe make shit salad,
Yeah, and I think
it's really not his fault.
No, and like he does the part as well as he could, but he has nothing to go on. And then I guess if you want to walk through the plot or not.
Yeah. I mean, like he's like a down on his luck MMA fighter with a family that's way too old for him. Like his daughter is way too old for him unless he had her when she was 15 or so, which is plausible, but raises too many questions and is too friggin' distracting for the rest of the plot. She looked more like his younger sister or something like that.
Or might have been a rewrite at another point, but then like
I wouldn't surprise. It seemed like they were trying to. I hated the whole "let's make him relatable" thing because they made him as unrelatable as possible as a consequence of that. Like indirectly or unintentionally, they ended up making him very unrelatable because the character turned into a block of wood personality-wise, and more to the point was he was a fucking weak character. I mean, he physically got his ass handed to him by everyone in the movie. We're getting into spoilers, by the way, by everyone in the movie
Yeah, it doesn't
except
matter.
Goro, who's supposed to be the champion of Mortal Kombat, who won 9 straight victories in a row and defeated the Great Kung Lao of the previous generation, and the Great Kung Lao is the guy that was able to defeat Shang Tsung. So in other words, Goro whooped the ass of the guy who whooped Shang Tsung's ass, and Cole dispatched of him like he was just some generic henchman as soon as he found his stupid magic power, which was really a Black Panther suit ripoff.
Well, and
with
like
the
it was
blade thrown in.
I do enjoy that the fact they were like, hey, Tonfa, this underrated weapon, let's try to put it in here in a interesting way. And it's like, you guys kind of missed the forest for the trees there because there's fun stuff.
Yeah,
to do with
yeah.
that.
And the other thing was they made him an MMA fighter, which in and of itself wouldn't be problematic. I actually liked seeing some of the grappling in there. I liked seeing some of the ground stuff in there. What I didn't like was that they limited the groundwork almost entirely to Cole, because
Right.
that type of stuff exists in other martial arts, not just modern MMA, and it's a misconception. And I'd like they should really incorporate that in other fights and other characters, especially the military characters. All of those guys have some kind of a ground game. If they're special forces characters, they know close quarter combat and they know basic grappling at the very least. And so I found it kind of ridiculous that they kind of left that stuff only to Cole. And more to the point is, other than when he beat up Goro, and then magically, just had to help with the final fight and be the guy to deliver some of the last shots on Sub-Zero as well, which was the thing that kind of ruined that fight for me. He got his ass handed to him by all of these other weaker characters. He basically fought at the beginning of the movie when they're establishing he's a down on his luck past his prime fighter, because that's what we want to relate to in a Mortal Kombat movie, a guy who can't fight.
Right.
But he basically loses a fight badly to the MMA equivalent of Spider Rico from Rocky 1.
Which I would be like, yeah, it would be cool if we just opened with. Here's the thing: if they had just saved, I don't want to say like that because it was an awesome scene. They, of course, why would they not want to show that? But if they had not opened the movie on like, meanwhile in Japan,
Uh,
they instead opened it with him, and then
it took place now.
yeah, and then slowly dipped into all this stuff. Don't make him related to Scorpion because
That was
why?
Whole thing of like he was needed to bring Scorpion back. Like they've painted themselves into this corner now of like, okay, so is Cole required for Scorpion to be a presence in any of the other movies now? These guys painted themselves in a lot of corners and might not even realize that's only one of many. Like don't even get me started on the friggin' Arcanas / magical stupid powers.
Which
that somehow
I don't remember that being a thing in the game.
It's not. It's not in any way, shape, or form at all. They made it up for the movie, and they even used the stupid tattoo thing. Like that's kind of taken from Mortal Kombat Annihilation. They have a tattoo that looks like that. That's a temporary portal between realms, and the gods characters have permanent ones. And so they literally took a shitty thing from a shitty movie for this shitty movie.
Reading some of the like wiki on it, apparently this was supposed to be the third installment that never went anywhere, and then this is what was apparently pushed out 20 years later or whatever. Which I mean, it's okay. So for my money, it's again, it's the parts are all there. I want to walk through the plot some more. Cole's down his luck, loses a fight, and he's out with his family. They're having fries or whatever, and then like Sub-Zero shows up. Like suddenly.
And as cool as that scene is, because I was still very engaged in the movie when this was going on. I was trying to give Cole the benefit of the doubt at this point.
Right.
And I was still very engaged in this scene. For me personally, it wasn't until Cole showed up at Sonya's place that I started to disengage. And the reason why is everything prior to that at least was more cohesive.
Well, and that's where the movie falls off. Like because suddenly like Jax is like your fight. Has this weird side intro scene, and then suddenly their friend, like I didn't even register that he got his name, and then he's suddenly there in his truck. He's like, "Get to Sony Play." It was like, "What? Who? Wait, your guys are friends? Why does he know any of this?"
He picked them up quick, and I get it. You can just GPS the direction, the address that he gave. I get it. It was just cut so quickly and choppy that it was. I can understand people losing that. I got that when I first saw the movie. I understood what was going on. But I also could see where it would lose somebody because it was just happening in such a haphazard manner. But even the fight with Jax and Sub-Zero, I was still engaged. in that. I didn't mind that they changed how he lost his arms. They retconned quite a few things in the games.
Yeah.
There's plenty to pull from as far as good lore. But if you want to talk about the chronological order in which the games came out, there are a lot of things that were either retconned or redone or whatnot. And so Jax lost his arms a couple of different ways over time. I'm fine with them doing that differently. That's not a huge detail. Who gives a shit? After that scene is when it starts to really fall apart. Side note, the scene where Sub-Zero is making all the ice rain down looks really cool, but it's really not saying much about him as an efficient assassin. He already left Hanzo for dead without making sure he was dead, which is like a stupid James Bond villain thing. And that was obviously just bad writing. And it reminded me of Dr. Evil, like when Seth is telling him, it's like, aren't you going to make sure he's dead and watch him die? It's like, no, I'm going to just assume he's dead. And it was like, that's what it reminded me of. And then he does the same thing with Jax. Like, okay, I blew
he fell off.
Yeah, it's like, is it too much for you to just throw an ice spike into his head and make sure that it hits the brainstem? I mean, sorry, not sorry. It's just reality. Like, it's not that hard to do. You're master of cold.
Well, then when did he? It's like, and this is the other thing with the transition from the opening scene to this scene is like, he's like, I'm no longer this guy. I am Sub-Zero. Really super quick and just like, did we miss something?
Well, like, why is he Sub-Zero now? Like,
he wasn't then.
Have known that for the last 200 or 300 years. Like, that makes no friggin' sense whatsoever. Like, you just saved the line for now because you thought it sounded cool. It happens now because the plot said it needed to happen. You know. The other thing was, can we discuss how horrible Outworld looked? If you look at the first movie, the 1995 movie, you can say what you want about that film. Say that it's cheesy at times. First of all, it's not as cheesy as people want to say it is. There are definitely cheesy moments that are kind of, that didn't age very well. That's true, but it's not the delicious. Whole friggin' movie.
It's delicious.
You know? And
it's the right amount of cheese.
Yeah, it's also a product of its time. This movie is not a product of its time. The 95 film was a product of its time, and so there's going to be some inevitable 90s cheese that's kind of stuck to that. Love it or hate it. And I can, like, some of it, even I look at it, I'm like, no, yeah, that didn't age very well. And that's fine. I still like the movie, and I can kind of look past that because it's a cohesive story. You really get to know the characters who become very well developed and fleshed out, and the action's very good in it. The CGI is very dated. It's like a movie that's over 20 years old. Of course, the movie is going to have dated effects. Like, that's not a really fair comparison. You want to say shitty CGI for Mortal Kombat Annihilation, the sequel that could have had better effects and actually had worse effects than the first movie? Fine. I'm totally with you on that. Yeah, the original film, that was cutting edge technology for the time. And the only more advanced technology was if you were looking at Terminator 2 or Jurassic Park, which were bigger budget films.
Yeah, and they didn't have, they had larger names attached to them, and they weren't, they, like, what is it? That was like Paul Anderson's like first film or whatever. Well, this was like,
ironically, he's the one that started the trend of even worse video game movies. Like, you thought it would get better, and then like Resident Evil came out, but not the point. This was when he was still directing good movies. You know, that and Event Horizon, basically. Where we're like, all right, he's a good director.
I would agree with you that once it gets to the house scene with the lizard and introducing Kano, and
well, the other thing is, I'm gonna say this too. Sonya was almost as poorly written of a character as Cole. Like, she was a close runner-up. She was more exciting. Her end fight with Kano was one of the somewhat better fights that didn't involve Scorpion and Sub-Zero.
And that legendary Mortal Kombat background, a trailer.
Yeah, like, I will say, like, if you did a comparison, the Kano and Sonya fight in this movie is definitely a better fight than the Kano and Sonya fight in the first movie. But there are reasons for that. One of the main reasons being that Bridget Wilson, who played Sonya in the original 95 film, was brought on very late in production to replace the original actress who got injured. And her injury was going to take too long to heal for them to wait for her. They didn't have the budget to wait.
Right.
And so it was originally Cameron Diaz who was supposed to play the part of Sonya. She got injured. Bridget Wilson was brought on at the absolute, like, 11th hour. And she didn't really have much time to rehearse the fight scenes or get in shape for the movie or anything. It's not her fault. She was replacing somebody. And so they had to kind of shorten that fight and scale it back quite a bit. So that really, it was what it was. It still was a subpar fight, the one in the 95 film, that is. but there was at least a legitimate reason behind that. In this movie, the bad fights don't really have an excuse. And that's an issue I take with it. It's just bad editing and bad choreography. Although the Sonya Kano fight was one of the somewhat better non-Scorpion Sub-Zero fights in the more recent film. But back to Sonya as far as a character in this movie. Sonya is supposed to be a very kind of self-sacrificial, ballsy character. Like, she's a badass, but also has other people's backs, especially Jax, all right, who's one of her closest comrades, or one of her closest brothers in arms, I should say. Cole shows up, says what happened, that Jax stayed behind in order to kind of hold Sub-Zero off for them to get away. And Cole kind of asks, like, all right, what about Jax? And the most Sonya has any regard to this is, I sent him a text. Gee Willikers, she sent him a text. He's clearly fine. It's not like he can
literally can't check it because he doesn't have any arms.
Yeah.
At least at that point.
Like, clearly he's fine. I mean, you sent him a text. That text is just gonna, like, it's kind of like a med pack in a video game. Like, sending him that text healed any injuries he might have sustained. You know, like, you don't have to go check on him. It's probably only about, I don't know, 45 minutes away or something like that. God forbid you go back to the warehouse that Cole can show you and make sure he's still alive. And a lot of this is because she's so preoccupied with wanting to get her tattoo so that she could be a part of the Mortal Kombat tournament. Well, she's so preoccupied with wanting that the whole movie that she turns it into a selfish ambition. She doesn't give a shit what happens to Jax until she actually sees him again and then can act concerned. And even her rivalry with Kano in this movie. In the original timeline, he's a thief, a smuggler, a criminal that she and Jax and others were trying to take down. And he even added it in that he killed one of her partners. And that's why she was after him. In this, the reason that they're holding him against his will is because he killed someone with one of the marks and now has one of the marks.
Which is one of the worst mechanics, because it's like, so like if I was in a car and I killed one of them and I was just driving, does that mean I get the tattoo? Yeah. If I accidentally bump into somebody and they fall off, crack their head and die, does that mean I get the tattoo?
So if you're Earl, the 250-pound overweight senior citizen with a bad knee and a heart condition, who happens to also drink too much, and one night after overdoing it, after a shitty football game that he didn't like, decided to plow into somebody by accident, and that person had the mark. I guess it's up to Earl to save the planet now, you know?
You must defend Earth. Earl, you must defend Earth realm.
Yeah, like, I guess his fatality will just be like, plowing his car into somebody, which is probably a pickup truck.
And for the life of me, I'll never understand, like, this whole... And I'm having flashbacks to Dune, weirdly enough, because I watched Dune around this time last year, and I was like, fun movie, except, this is why people hate sci-fi. Too much crap going on that, like, I had to watch it like a floating head explain something, and there was a giant testicle in space for 20 minutes, and then everyone's on drugs. This, too, was like, there's just, like, way too much going on. I don't know what's going... Why is Raiden just like... What was stopping you from coming down and stopping all this from happening? I cannot interfere. You just interfered.
The plot saying it had to be so. That's what stopped him from doing that. Like, at the end of the movie, he just, like, lightning Shang Tsung away. He's like, be gone. Clearly, he couldn't have done that 70 minutes ago and just eliminated this problem altogether. The whole thing with, I've teleported us into a realm between realms where the Outworlders cannot come. Well, clearly he couldn't have just teleported everybody there earlier in the movie all at once, and they could have trained there and just brought some food and water. If anybody needed to use the shitter and there wasn't one there, they could have just teleported them and had the buddy system going, and then just got teleported back.
Who cares? It's the nobody's there.
Well, there's like nothing but white all over the place. You probably don't want to see a bunch of brown streaks all over,
So this movie continues, and then they take so Sonya and they take Kano, and they're wandering around, and they run into... I always get this. Let's
not forget that Kano knows exactly where this place is, or at least has an idea, but the plane drops them off in the middle of nowhere where they still have to do this huge hike where him with the knife went to his leg, that magically disappeared and stopped being part of the storyline, can just go to, like, God forbid you had them drop you off only half a mile from the friggin' temple,
What is it? Then they get to where that is, finally, and then suddenly Liu Kang comes out, which we're just like, yay, Liu Kang. And he's
Hey,
like,
at one point, he decides to hit Kano with a fireball, and then 10 seconds later say, "I'm not your enemy."
he's a good actor. He fills that role perfectly.
Oh no,
And
it's not his fault. The writing was bad, but like that's not the way you gain the trust of somebody. You don't hit them with fire and then tell them that you're not their enemy. Yeah, Raiden was kind of a shitty mentor in this movie. Like he might have been the worst character. Like I mean, Cole was bland, but Raiden might have been the worst written character in the entire movie.
well, then how does
Um,
like Liu Kang like? How did he find? How did they take like I don't know how many days, 2 days maybe to get
yeah.
from where they were to where they are, where they found Raiden's
And why didn't Raiden just teleport them all to begin with? Because we established later in the movie that he can easily do that.
And then what is it, Jax? Like, how does Liu Kang find Jax and move Jax, somebody who's clearly bigger than him, even with minus the arms,
Yeah.
to there? And then he's like, we're sourcing from other realms. You're sourcing from other realms. What does that
Like,
mean?
what? How did the monks all of a sudden become the best surgeons in the world, in the most unsanitary place? By the way, like what sense did that make? Oh yeah, it didn't. Got it.
The ice cauterized the wounds.
Yeah, and that was fine. You wanna run with that? Fine. I mean, I still say he would have bled to death internally, or died of shock. But again, this is
Yeah.
Mortal Kombat, so I'm willing to put some shit aside. Like that's fine. Make some of the plot afterwards make sense. It didn't make any sense how they found him. Sonya should have been the one to find him. She should have been concerned and looked for him and showed that she was actually a character who gave a shit about anybody but herself in the fucking movie. And it should have been the special forces that gave him the arms, because that's what happened in the story of the games. Or do something similar to that. Have it that somehow it's the Cyber Ninja initiative that results in him having his arms. But do something that is tech related. Don't turn it into some stupid magical power.
How did it doesn't make any sense either. It's like, how does it become like mystical robot Iron Man
mystical
arms?
nanotechnology. Like really?
But it's magic technology.
Yeah, it just made no goddamn sense. And
magic robots.
I saw it coming. As soon as he started trying to lift the rock off her, I was kind of doing a face palm. I was like, all right, I already see where this is going. And sure enough, then the arms started growing bigger. They never should have given him those shitty T-Rex arms. That shouldn't have been there. Just give him the big arms from the get-go. He doesn't, and eliminate the stupid Arcana thing with the powers. He doesn't have a superpower. He's a big, strong guy who now has mechanical arms. Done. Same thing with Kano. How the fuck is a laser eye like magic? And why would that be the thing to give him?
He only has one and two. He doesn't have two.
That's the other thing.
One.
If it was magic and not scientific, where it was related to a single implant, wouldn't they have just given it to him in both eyes and enabled him to control it out of both eyes, kind of like Cyclops? That just made no damn sense. And plus, they didn't even have the decency to give him the metal plate, because that would have contradicted how he got his laser eye.
And then it doesn't make any sense how, like, and then I guess because there really isn't a whole lot of plot because I'm thinking we need to walk through the plot to this. It's like there really isn't a whole lot of other plot. It's like,
well, a lot of it is just quote unquote training, and really the training in this, like them doing a really bad job sparring was and then getting pissed about it and then having Raiden bitch them. That was their training. Let's spar in a really bad way, get yelled at, and then just do that again.
Yeah, and then it just sounds like do training better, be stronger. I don't know if you've seen Death of Stalin, but it looks very good movie, but it's Stalin's son, and one of the opening scenes is yelling at this hockey team, and he's like, play the sport better, do it better. And it's just like, why is Raiden acting like, and then he's like, well, you wouldn't be able to defend Earthrealm. Aren't you a little concerned that these are the people about getting these guys up to snuff?
Aren't you worried that these guys are going to get their asses handed to them? I mean,
no, there's no real Mortal Kombat. It's just Shao Tsung wants to. I guess we can get to the actual meat of it. Is where I don't know.
He's trying to fucking take out all the people for the tournament, which makes no sense. The other thing about this, where it's all pre-tournament. And people are like bitching about that. Oh, you just don't understand this movie. This was supposed to be a prequel to. I don't have a problem with being a prequel. It just still needs to be well done. This wasn't well done. If this was a backstory movie, on just Scorpion and Sub-Zero, I would have been fine with that. If this was a backstory movie on just Liu Kang and Kung Lao, or on just Jack, Sonya, and Kano, I would have been fine with that. But that wasn't the case. This was a mishmash, and they were trying to find a way to insert fights that involved everybody that wasn't the tournament. And the more chaotic that got, the more they started contradicting themselves and painting themselves into more and more corners and creating more and more plot holes with the stupid teleportation, the arcanas, the ways that Raiden did and didn't protect anybody. He pretty much was the most useless fucking guy in the entire movie. And with that, you create this sense of chaos, like it's like chaotic, just fights all over the place. But that's the story in the third game. After the second tournament in Mortal Kombat 2, Shao Kahn says fuck it, and he finds at least a temporary loophole in order to start invading Earth anyway. And so there are chaotic fights all over the place. So now you've already done that, and you're going to repeat that now redundant process later if you try to go with that story, and it's not going to have the same level of impact because it was supposed to be, here's the tournament, and now it's like, fuck the tournament later, all bets are off. That was a good setup because you were used to the rules of the tournament first. So you establish rules so you can break them later in a different storyline. And now it raises the stakes. This blew its load, or tried blowing its load, way too soon with too much shit. And it didn't do a good job with any of it.
Well,
it basically...
Wait, was this the actual thing? Like, was this?
No, it wasn't the tournaments. It was supposed to be. This was all pre-tournament fights, which frankly, it was like, the Earth guys aren't doing too well. If you hadn't provoked them, they probably would have just remained shitty fighters, and you would have just picked them off at the tournament, which is the point of the tournament to begin with.
That might have even just been a good plot, basic plot. We know who these people are. They're weak. They don't understand what's going on. There's only two of them who really have unlocked their powers. They should be easy pickings. Once we get rid of them, the rest of them will fall.
Yeah, unless
why isn't that the one plot? The whole Cole has a guy that he screwed up and put in an iron lung, and then somehow went to underworld or overworld or outworld.
Are you talking about Cabal? Who I
why
don't know why
they know each other? Why was he there?
Know each other in the games. They did make it that they know each other. They're actually both from the Black Dragon Society. They just didn't establish it well in the movie. The other thing that they did to kind of make Cabal like someone you couldn't take seriously, which was a mistake, was they gave him that stupid accent. And I say this as someone who grew up in New York, but they made him sound like a mobster that would be beaten up by Spider-Man in a comic book. And it was so ridiculous. He doesn't sound like that. Some people were saying, "Oh, that's exactly how he sounds in Mortal Kombat 11." No, it's not. I've played Mortal Kombat 11. He doesn't have that stupid accent.
Well, and I think this might have also been the issue of having too much to draw on.
There was too much to draw on. It's just that they didn't know when to stop, but they also didn't know when to start. The entire time I was waiting for the movie to start, and it never really kicked off in a good way.
Yeah.
After 15 minutes, it was kind of like the movie did a restart and never actually got the turnover.
Well, and then I would 100% agree with. And then we get to the end fights, and the end fights just feel like, I don't know why Jax is fighting Hammer Man, Centaur guy.
Yeah. Well, that's the other thing. Reiko was a character who appeared in Mortal Kombat 4. The big guy with the hammer doesn't look like that. He's a pretty muscular guy, but he doesn't look like that. He's not that big. And he's someone who easily could have been played by either Gary Daniels or Daniel Bernhardt, neither of whom would have charged some astronomical, unaffordable amount of money for the budget of this movie. Either one of those guys would have pulled that character off more accurately and better, and pulled off a way better fight scene as well. That fight scene was horrible.
Well, and that didn't make any sense to me. And then I didn't understand why, and this goes into well, I can't interfere. Wait a minute, you're just interfering by grabbing a bunch of people and throwing them in a bunch of different places suddenly. What?
Well, and then if you're gonna make it all chaotic like that, Cole specifically said that the last person they were gonna take out was Sub-Zero, but they were gonna all jump him at once. Well, why didn't you just do that with all the characters? So that way you're all fresh and you're not beat up from your fights.
Yeah, you just take them out one at a time, like they were trying to do to you. Well, or they should have done to you.
Yeah. Plus, in all reality, let's think about this for a second. And this is where it's a matter of because the plot said so. The tournament exists so that this shit doesn't happen. But because this shit happened, what was to stop any of the Earth characters, especially the Special Forces characters, from getting the gun and just fucking blowing everybody away? I guess you're not making it to the tournament now, huh? Since everyone's breaking the rules anyway.
And then, but at the end, the guy's like, "Well, death is only another realm." Da da da.
I hate that because
So
okay, so
basically,
that
we've
means
cheapened. So we can
yeah,
use Sub-Zero again. So we can use Goro again.
yeah.
So we can
Or
use
like, well,
Reiko
Sub
again.
Zero was supposed to come back as Noob Saibot. That I was fine with. As far as everybody just coming back to life, yes, they've resurrected people in the games, but that's because you're an active participant in a game and you just want to be able to play as certain characters. There's a little forgiveness there. When you're a passive participant, an audience member watching a movie, it's different. You know, your level of ability to suspend disbelief is different than when you're an active participant in a video game and are willing to overlook certain shit so that your gameplay experience can be more fun.
Yeah.
All right.
That's
But as a passive viewer, it requires more in order for it to actually be a good experience, at least for most people anyway. And that whole concept just made no goddamn sense. That means we could just bring anybody back whenever. So in other words, that completely removes any kind of emotional attachment, any tension you feel, any fear for the safety of any of the characters during any of these fights, because if they get killed, who gives a shit? They'll just come back later. Instead of it actually having an impact, it's just inconvenience.
right. This is what got me thinking at the end, where it's like they were like, "Well, I'm going to Hollywood," and then we get a close up on Citizen Cage.
Oh my god, and that pissed me off more than anything else, to be honest, because I
They're
already
not appearing in this film.
Well, I already knew he wasn't going to be in it. We're going to get into that in a second, but I already knew he wasn't going to be in it. I'd kind of at least accepted it enough. But the tease at the end was like, if that movie was good, I might have been okay with that tease. But the entire movie was so shitty. It was as if it was their way of saying, well, this movie sucked, but we're going to have Johnny Cage in the next one. You know, so come back. You know, I just saw an article saying that they promised more fatalities in the new movie. So once again, they're trying to dangle the carrot in front of the lowest common denominator of human intelligence, who's just going to look and be like, fatality. Like that's nice, but you need more to it than that for it to actually be good. You know, and that's the thing that pisses me off. It's like this isn't something that should be mindless. It shouldn't be a good bad movie, and it shouldn't be a parody of itself. Things that fit in those contexts and those subgenres and so on. This shouldn't have been one of them. There's too much lore and background.
I'm looking at the IMDb of the director, and he literally only has 2 credits to his name.
He directed a commercial.
Yeah, he directed a commercial, and then he did this.
Yeah.
So I mean, like that's the level of care I guess that was given to this.
Yeah. I personally believe that was done intentionally so that the producer is not the producer. I'm sorry, so that the production company, so Warner Brothers, could bully the guy around and control him more, and just do with the movie whatever the hell they wanted. They were the ones who mandated that the new character be in the first place.
Release the McQuaid cut. What I was thinking was at the end of that, and he's walking away, and it's the close up on Johnny Cage and all that stuff. That guy's a cage fighter, right? Why wasn't he Johnny Cage?
Well, you know what?
Because he's a cage fighter.
To be honest, I'm glad they didn't turn him into Johnny Cage, because as much as that would have made sense, Louis Tan looks nothing like Johnny Cage.
That's okay.
And
I'm okay with that.
Me personally, I get pissed off when the characters don't look a thing like they do in the original source material. And yes, I get it. In video games, sometimes because of the computer generating and because how they render a certain character, they might look different from game to game. But there are usually at least a general set of ideas for a character. And when it goes against that grain so much that the character is not recognizable, that pisses me off. Like, for example, Reiko looked like absolute shit in the movie. They turned him into just some big bebop or rocksteady looking moron instead of him being who he should have been. He's actually supposed to be a general second in command to Shao Kahn, and he's supposed to be actually a pretty good strategist. Plus, he's not that big. He's big, but not that big.
And then it was like, what is it? Goro just basically looked like the Hulk plus 2 arms.
As far as his look goes, I mean, his face could have looked a little better, but as far as them just doing him full CGI, I was fine with that, because they enabled him to move around better.
Do you want them to find the puppet from 1995?
No, I was actually fine with the CGI from this movie for that character, for Goro. I just didn't like how they used him. They turned him into a plot device, and he just became a henchman that got killed, and that was dumb. Melina's another one.
Who?
She looked not Melina. Yeah, exactly. You know,
that's what
Melina.
That was half my response to this movie was like, wait, who was that? Was that the knife?
Melina,
was that the Psy knife girl, or was that the dragon lady?
yes, Melina was the girl with the size who clearly didn't know how to use them. She looked nothing like the character. First of all, that character through the majority of the games had an Asian and predominantly Chinese look to her, with maybe the exception of Mortal Kombat 2 when they had actors and actresses play it, and the girl might have been white who played her, but she was a ninja-esque character who was supposed to be at least Asian or Asian looking. And in just about every single game, especially from the 3D era onward, when it was all computer generated, they gave her an Asian or predominantly Asian appearance. And so I didn't like the subtle virtue signaling that they did with like, well, let's race bend this character. You know, they had a perfectly acceptable black female ninja character that they could have cast, and that was Jade.
That's not even virtual signaling, like quote unquote virtual signaling in that regard. Because what dialogue did she have? She had like,
well, that's what I mean.
No dialogue. So you screwed up one character, and then you didn't include another character who could have had some dialogue.
Yeah. Well, I
didn't even know who this character was.
Yeah. It's what I fit into the category that I call fake woke. And that's a thing as far as I'm concerned. It's this like pat yourself on the shoulder, let's show how virtuous we are by promoting such diversity, this, that, and the third, with it being as one-dimensional as a fucking dry piece of Chex cereal, that's cut in half
also
and put in the microwave.
Same production company that apparently didn't want, like in Justice League, Cyborg to be like, they didn't want an angry black guy in there. So in this movie, it's okay to have that, and also have an African American woman who doesn't talk at all, and then is just complete demon villain, then gets killed off at the end. Yeah, because that doesn't fit stereotypes.
Exactly. And so if they really wanted to have a female black character in there, they could have just put Jade in there and not even bothered with Melina in this movie, especially because Melina should have been with Katana. They're supposed to be sisters in a sense.
Which is like she's not even
supposed to be Katana's clone. Katana's the one that usually wore blue and had the fans. Melina, by the way, not just what the actual actress looked like, but also the makeup looked like dog shit. The CGI teeth were fucking terrible. If you ever look at most of the last few games, it's this huge set of like shark-looking teeth that she has, and it was so quick that the way they did it in the movie, and it was cheap looking. It looked like garbage. Plus, she also usually wore a mask over it. They have like the dried blood over there instead. It was like, who realistically is just going to walk around with dried blood on their face? Like, that's the laziness, that you can't just put the ninja mask that everyone knows over her and then have her take the ninja mask off and reveal the teeth, which is what the character did all the time.
Which is
in the games.
Well, and that's like, especially in this day and age, kind of would even make more sense to a degree.
Well, then the other thing is her outfit should have had at least some purple. To be honest, I hated the color palettes of the clothes in this movie. I'm not saying everything had to be super bright, but Mortal Kombat is typically a pretty colorful set of games. All right. As far as the legitimate diversity of the characters, and second of all, as far as the outfits and the set designs and all that stuff as well. So Melina was supposed to be wearing a predominantly purple outfit. Does it have to be some bright purple, non-practical for combat thing? No. But throw in a little bit of the actual color that the character wears. Don't make it like everything's got to be black leather.
Yeah,
like
that didn't
noise
make a
the
lot
shit out of me.
I mean, you know clearly more than I do about any of this, but it's like, that's why I wanted to get your take on this. But it just felt like when they got to the enemy characters, they were just like, and you, and you, and you, and you, and I was just like, were we supposed to know these people? Okay, I guess Rita Repulse is getting all her minions together and they will conquer Earth, which is exactly what it felt like.
Oh my god! Not only were they so bland that they could have been anybody, but the way that Shang Tsung was introducing each of them when they first showed them, Natara, my beauty vampiric queen, or whatever, so and so, the ancient reptilian, sent him in, and like it was. Are you fucking calling in a wrestler to a match at a show? Like, I kind of expected him to say, if you, Jill, the master of unlocking, like that's what I was expecting was going to be down the pipeline. And next, it was like it was the worst dialogue that I've heard since the fucking first Resident Evil game. Like God
They
damn.
they could have really done a better job with this, and I think this is everyone's like video games can't be good movies. Well, yeah, I mean, like there's some debate on that, but ultimately, it's like you just have a simple martial arts story
Yeah.
that was done, I would say, by comparison, arguably better while ago. Just, I mean, it was '90s version of diversity, but relatively
Which
diverse
film?
cast.
Talking the 95 film?
Yeah,
You know what? People want to say that shit like, oh, what? Like, there was even one of the actors was saying that the first movie was whitewashed. Bullshit. You had a Chinese lead. Liu Kang was the main character, as he was supposed to be. He should have been the main character in this fucking movie.
yeah,
Not to
but
mention, there were other Asian individuals. The main antagonist, who was probably the most charismatic, or one of the two most charismatic people in the movie, was Shang Tsung in that movie, Kazuhiro Yukitagawa. He was amazing in that movie. Like
well,
the Shang Tsung that was in this new film looked like shit compared to him. Like he couldn't carry shit compared to the way that guy did in the first movie. You think of Shang Tsung, you automatically think of that 95 version because he was just so memorable and good in that role.
and I don't want to do too many comparisons because I would love to just do a like standalone episode on that film alone.
Yeah.
But I will say this: Christopher Lambert, like can pull off a Scotsman who meets to pull off a Scotsman who meets another Scotsman who happens to be Egyptian but is actually Spanish.
Uh,
I mean, like if that man can fill like
yeah.
literally any role anyway. So you know what, like,
And that's the thing. Like people, well, I'm not going to say people in general. Whoever was complaining that the fucking movie, that the original film was whitewashed. All right, Christopher Lambert wasn't picked for that role because he was a white guy. He was picked for that role because of people remembering him for being awesome in Highlander. Hell, he was awesome in Highlander too, and that was a terrible movie.
another
All
thing we
right,
need to get to at some
that's
point. But
yeah,
um,
that's the reason they picked him for that role, because they knew that he'd be a good fit personality wise, and they were right. And I've said since seeing that movie, since seeing the 1995 film, I've always said if they were ever to remake Mortal Kombat and try to do it again, that in all honesty, I'd be happy if they actually did cast an Asian individual to be Raiden, to be a little closer to the mythology, the original source material that they kind of pulled in order to make that character in the game.
the actor who played Raiden in this movie was fine. They just directed him to just be like, "Rah, I'm an angry man."
Well, that was,
Rah, blah, blah, blah.
but yeah, like in my opinion, I actually wanted to see an Asian version of Raiden because I got that the source material was Japanese and also Chinese for that matter as well, for the creation of that character in the original games.
That's what I did really
But
like at the beginning
one
of this
guy,
film. They had
like
they
one,
had a Chinese guy and a Japanese guy
oh,
speaking to each other, and they were like, "I
and
don't
in
understand
English,
what you're saying," but
yeah,
they recognize that it's like, "I don't understand what you're saying, but I am going to kill you.
yeah,
You just killed my family." They
yeah,
just kept that alone. That was
yeah.
good, but the
They
rest
didn't
of it,
throw in
not so much.
English, but Christopher Lambert was the one guy that I've always said he's the one person who can acceptably play Raiden because he did such an awesome job and brought so much to that character. And I can't see anybody else who's not an Asian guy playing the part, and I get that. But the guy that they got, whether it was his acting or the directing or a combination of both, they made Raiden into a block of wood other than when he was just being an asshole.
Yeah.
And it was so frustrating because there was supposed to be so much more to that character. He was supposed to be like the wise one who's guiding everybody and helping them grow as characters and so on and so forth. And whether they were going to make him as humorous as Christopher Lambert was, or make him play it a little more straight, or maybe meet somewhere in the middle of that, he needed to have a personality, and so did Shang Tsung in this movie. Not to mention the fact, and this is probably more due to the fact that the character in this movie had such a little personality that I started resorting to a previous role that he played. But Shang Tsung in this movie had practically no personality at all, was given very little to work with, it seemed. And as a result, through part of the movie, I kept seeing him as the guy in The Dark Knight, the money launderer or whatnot that Batman had to go to China to get. And I just kept thinking of the Joker.
I didn't even
going,
recognize him as that. Holy crap!
That's him. And I kept thinking of the Joker talking to him on the television screen. I know a squealer when I see one, and like that. I kept thinking of that every time I saw this movie because he wasn't giving me a new personality to identify with as Shang Tsung.
Well, and like that was the other thing. Is like these guys are just like, why don't they just fight and then they don't have to have a whole like, all right, but
Yeah.
Mortal Kombat.
Well, the other thing was, and we got to address this. Other than the Scorpion and Sub-Zero fights, other than the fights that involved one or both of those individuals, most or all of the fights in this movie were not only subpar, but pretty awful. Like not only
I
like,
can't recall them. That's the problem. Like I couldn't
that's
tell you what
the problem.
I couldn't tell you.
But-
Like I really like the whole like Liu
God.
Kang like fire dragon thing. That was cool.
Yeah,
I did appreciate what they did with the Tonfa. Like I actually did appreciate that because I know how like of an undervalued weapon that is with a lot of people.
Yeah.
It's not as well known. I did like how they tried to, uh, try to make something out of that other character with the hat.
Kung Lao.
But I thought he would have been cool to keep
He
on,
was
but I guess we
real
needed.
cool. They just killed him off so damn soon. I was like, come on, really? He was the one guy that you actually made like with generating an interest in. And the way he got killed was just cheap and stupid. It was like, well, if he can just grab somebody and suck their soul out, why didn't he just do that to everyone? And if he can clearly teleport wherever he wants to, just like Raiden does, why doesn't he wait until one of these guys is fucking taking a shit in his apartment and just appear and take his soul? Like, it just didn't make sense. He took the souls of people who either A, he defeated in combat, or B, were defeated in combat, according to either the games, the first movie, or some kind of combination of both.
Just say like the fights just didn't resonate. There's nothing there
They were
that
very
like I remember more stuff from like Iron Fist. The only reason I remember that is because there's too many damn episodes of that show.
Oh, that show is horrible, man.
That's
Like,
another,
if
that's
that
another
show
topic for
is an
another day.
improvement- Yeah, I know, but it's like if that show is better than what this was, that's really saying something.
Yeah.
Like this movie was a little bit better than Mortal Kombat Annihilation. I'll give it that, but it doesn't mean it was good.
I know who was fighting, but
Yeah.
there was nothing else going on. Like it was just like, all right, and we're done.
Yeah, I remember sitting in the theater, and the whole time I'm looking at these fights, and I'm like I was easily able to tell when some of the guys who were more experienced in martial arts were deliberately and painfully slowing their shit down so that whoever they were fighting in that scene can keep up with them, because they obviously didn't rehearse enough. And it was painfully obvious sometimes. And then other times it was just like a quicker than a fight from the movie The Quest type of situation, where it was like 30-40 seconds and the fight's over. And it was also edited and cut so badly. Whoever edited this film, like whoever actually cut this shit up the way they did, needs to be blacklisted from ever editing a fucking film ever again, because they did the worst job imaginable, other than accidentally shredding the entire thing in half.
Well, and
Like,
it could also just be a matter
you
of
could
like
barely tell what's going on.
what they had. Like that was the other thing. Is like you don't know like how the filmography
be.
worked.
It
Or
might
they
be,
might have just
but,
been
I mean,
like,
there were
let's be
moments where,
merciful
like,
to people, keep it in 90
there are
minutes.
well, it's two things. One is there are moments where there are these quick cuts where someone's here and then they're in another spot that doesn't make any sense sometimes.
Oh yeah,
And
that's all.
then there are other moments
It's
where,
the Tenant problem where
yeah,
let's talk over here now.
yeah. Well, the other thing is there are other scenes where it's obviously hiding the lack of experience of some of the actors.
Yeah.
And that's where you should have hired people who were more experienced in martial arts and fight choreography, and who could handle that workload very professionally and more consistently. I mean, like, is that so much to ask? You take a look at the Raid movies, you take a look at The Night Comes For Us, you take a look at the Undisputed movies or the Ong Bak movies, Tam Yum Gung, aka The Protector, and a number of other films that go back to even further back than those films. You take a look at Wheels on Meals or Dragons Forever. You take a look at the 36th Chamber of Shaolin, 8 Diagram Pole Fighter, or not, like I could keep going. But my point is,
There's
and even
plenty of
films
good-
that otherwise were like,
Go ahead.
yeah, like you even take other films that otherwise had low quality in every other area, but got the fights right, like The King of the Kickboxers or No Retreat, No Surrender 2 and 3, which were not related to the first film, but not the point. But the fight scenes in those movies are off the chain, and they had a lot less to work with. They had about the same budget as probably the price of a used car, and they still got that shit right. And this big budget film, it might not have the same budget as an Avengers film, but it's not a pretty damn good budget. Okay, $50 million is a decent film. And you look at the fights and you're like, what the fuck did you do? Did you have like a drunk college kid who practiced wrestling with his roommates in a fucking yard, choreograph this shit and just like turn it out like as a first draft in like 30 minutes? Because that's what it looks like.
Well, and I think
And
this was reliance on CGI and nonsense like that.
oh my God. Yeah. Like the backflip that Sonya does and like some of the other moves all throughout.
And
Some of this stuff could be CGI, not all of it though. Like too much of it was CGI. It really,
it's doing that.
shit out of it.
It's doing that blend that should work, and it should work with a bigger budget movie. And I always agree with this point where it's like, even if the action can still be good, and you can still get like, how hard is it to find solid actors or to train up solid actors
Yeah.
or to train?
I mean, it's been
train
done
up
before.
solid performers to
Yeah.
become better actors, because you probably just need to figure out what that characterization needs to be. And it's just,
Yeah.
oh well. Any
And
final thoughts
that's-
you want to cap on?
Yeah,
this?
you know what? Like as far as final thoughts go, I'm on the fence as to what I think about the potential for a sequel for this, because I know that they're already greenlighting the thing. I'm pretty sure about that. They've been talking about it left and right in different articles and so on and so forth. These guys really need to course correct and up their game. I'm at a point where I personally don't ever want to see the 2021 film ever again. Like I wouldn't see that film if it was jokingly as a drinking game. You'd literally have to pay me money to sit through that film again. If they're gonna make a good sequel, they really, really need to actually listen to the fans. Like this whole time, with all the hype that was building up to this movie, they were in interviews with a bunch of people on social media. Like they were pretty gracious about that. And you know what? It worked. It was kind of like the movie version of clickbait, because it got everyone kind of on their side and thinking, wow, these guys really give a shit and seem to know what they're doing. Let's see what they churn out. I'm not crazy about the new character they're adding, but let's see what they do with it, because they seem to really care. The whole time that they were talking about really wanting to please the fans and this and that, people were believing it because they were really putting themselves out there, even with regular lay people type interviewers and so on. They need to take what they were saying they were going to do with the first movie and actually do it with the second movie. Like the lip service is not going to work right now. And it's to a point where like I am pretty much at a point where if they do make another one, I will probably wait to see it until I can watch it at somebody's house. I already paid money for myself and my kids to see this one. And
Which is why I'm surprised you could have seen it you can see it in your home. Like, yeah, that's the thing.
Well, the reason being, I wanted to support the movie as much as I could. And I also wanted to see it on the big screen, to be honest. And I also wanted to throw a lot of support in the direction of actually Joe Taslim and Hiroyuki Sanada, who I knew were going to be good in it regardless. And, you know, that being said, I'm not going to do that with the next movie. I might not even bother if it's on a streaming station. I might actually wait to watch it first before I throw my money in its direction. And if I'm saying this, and I'm just one person,
right?
You know, and I'm not even like the most diehard fan. Like I probably sound to some people like I am. I'm just annoyed because this was a huge, you know, like it's a huge missed opportunity, and it's also an insult to people who like something a certain way, and that kind of thing gets on my nerves. Like where there are people who are kind of like borderline bullying people who are critical of this movie, and I mean, I play the games. I do. I have the games and I played them and I love the first movie and so on. But there are people who eat, breathe, and sleep this series who are probably a lot more annoyed about this shit than I am. And if that's the case, that means there's probably a lot of them. And that means that there's probably a lot of tickets that these guys are going to lose on the next film alone, just because of how badly they fucked up with this one. So my thing there would just be like they really need to course correct. I'm even open to them like flat out doing retcons at this point to some of the stupid shit like the Arcanas. If they flat out retcon that the same way that Rocky retconned the brain damage from part 5 and part 6 to where they never even mentioned that bullshit, you know, I'd actually be totally fine with that, you know. Well, like they need to literally just do away with a lot of the mistakes they've painted themselves into a corner with.
As somebody who's just casual with it, like someone who was just like saw people talking about Mortal Kombat and was like, oh, let's check this out, see what's up. It's just sad to see nowadays that like they can't get this right. Oh, Christ.
It's annoying to see low standards
Especially for
some.
something like coming from a big studio and something that's like supposedly representing
No, that's exactly.
yeah, and that's why I think they could make a second movie with Johnny Cage in it, and you just
If they cast the right guy, like they're already veering in some directions where I'm like, oh God, not again. Like there's talk about them trying to get either Ryan Reynolds or the Miz, and I'm kind of like, look, Ryan Reynolds is a talented guy, but there are people who can really pull off the action necessary for the role.
Ryan
And Ryan Reynolds is a good actor, but come on, he's not going to be doing the kind of leg work over and over again. He's going to need a double.
He's in his like what, mid-40s at this point.
Well,
that's not going to work out.
But even like, Scott Adkins and Elaine Moosey, either one of them would easily nail that role, action wise and acting wise and look wise. They would nail that role, and each of them is almost 40. So, but so I'm not really worried about the age because they both still look the part, but they can actually deliver. They can easily. They both have enough acting chops to play Johnny Cage, and they both have more than enough film experience to make that role work really well, as long as there's not some douchebag holding them back.
Well, and that's the other thing where it's like they try to have like the one quote unquote comedy character in Kano, and it just wouldn't shut up the entire
Oh my
movie.
God, like it was funny at first and it just got annoying after a while. And then like even for the people who want to say he was funny throughout, that's nice, but they took away any semblance of that character being menacing or posing any kind of a threat to anyone else in that movie, except for Cole, and that doesn't count.
Yeah, and this is why I don't have like I'm just like I don't know who these characters were. Like I have no, like if you told me like Lao Kung or any of these guys who any of these guys are, like I'm just like, and then watching the 95 version be like, oh, I can tell you who that guy is. I can tell you who that guy is. I can tell you who she is. I can tell you who Raiden is. Like I can tell you who all these guys are. In this one, I'm like, guy with, it doesn't pass the smell test in terms of characterizations.
Well, let me put it this way. You remember in the 95 film, Liu Kang fights the other ninja that started out as the reptilian creature, Reptile.
Right.
That's supposed to be the lizard thing that Kano kills. It's supposed to be the same character.
Right.
So instead of us getting a really well choreographed fight that was actually engaging and exciting, we got some CGI piece of shit instead. Which
literally looked like at the end.
Yeah. Like, I mean, that just goes to show how little these guys get it.
But wasn't the heart rip out spine thing one of the moves in the game?
The heart rip out thing was, but it was so cheaply done. Like
it did not look great.
Oh my God. Like that should have been against a human character, not a reptilian, because it kind of lost the effect there for me. Plus, I know what Reptile was supposed to be like. Yes, he has a true form as kind of a reptilian creature, but more of the form of how he was playable in the games was he always, even when he looked scaly at times, he always resembled some kind of a ninja in his better forms. And he had martial arts moves. And so he had kind of like a humanoid look to him and was able to pull off martial arts moves. That's why they did it better in the 95 film. That's how he looked in the first couple of games, just like a ninja, and in that context, they didn't have to worry about CGI. They just had to worry about the actor being able to pull off martial arts moves, and they got Keith Cook to play the part in the 95 film, so there was no problem with that at all, because that guy's an excellent martial artist. But with the new one, with Johnny Cage and whatever other characters, they really need to step up the game as far as the fight choreography. They need to look at the Raid films. They need to look at a fair number of the better, I'd say, Michael Jai White or Scott Adkins films. They need to look at martial arts films where the camera actually focuses on the action, doesn't zoom in and cut everyone's limbs out, and doesn't do such quick cuts that you can't see the movements. And also doesn't have 40 other things going on that you have to keep cutting to. Like, no one gives a shit about the other 40 things. We want to see the fight.
Which leads me to believe they didn't choreograph this well, or it wasn't.
No.
Or they didn't have camera people who understood how to catch this correctly. or yeah,
Yeah.
or it might have been both, or it might have just been like what they had wasn't really workable. That's why I'm saying like I don't ever want to blame any one particular person because you don't really know. So that's why I'm
This
just
yeah seemed like a group fuck up to me. Um,
yeah,
and I would say the people least responsible were the actors because there were other people who were supposed to make sure that shit worked right, and they seemed to drop the ball. They got to get a better team on this. They've already painted themselves into a lot of corners at once, and so we've already lost the opportunity to do some really cool origin stories. I mean, unless they do prequels, which might be good but aren't going to have the same impact because we already know what it's already leading to.
which is and this movie like was already kind of that. So what are you going to prequelize?
Yeah,
So
and
there's no point to that at the end of the story. You
yeah,
just need to trudge on and do something better. I say this,
yeah,
where it's like Batman Begins. I didn't really think it was that great of a movie when I first saw it. I thought it was like okay, but like going back and watching it, you can appreciate it because you saw Dark Knight, and Dark Knight's was really good. Maybe not Dark Knight Rises, but I mean, in kind of retrospect, you can kind of view it as a good starting point. Even from a
yeah,
bad starting point, you could have a good sequel. You know that has happened before, but yeah, I'd agree. They've
yeah.
got to get it. They've got to get it right next time. But
Yeah, like a good comparison actually is take the last 20 minutes of The Dark Knight Rises, where you had the evolution of Two-Face, which should have been left for the next movie, and it just got crammed into 20 minutes or something instead, and combine that with 90%. I'm sorry, not The Dark Knight Rises, The Dark Knight, the second film. Take the last 15 or 20 minutes of The Dark Knight, the whole thing with Two-Face, which should have been reserved for the third film and wasn't. It was just crammed in and rushed. Combine that with 90% of the third film, The Dark Knight Rises, where it was kind of a mess. And that's kind of the problems, or set of problems that this movie suffered from, but on a lower budget scale. They tried cramming way too much in there instead of letting things breathe. And that was a huge mistake. When the first movie came out, as much as there were a lot of limitations and a lot of shortcomings of that first movie, they knew how to let a scene breathe. They knew how to develop characters and keep a movie well paced. And they knew how to focus on a fight scene without cutting out the action and without it getting shortchanged for the sake of whatever else might have been going on in the scene before or after. They knew how to flesh out the main characters. They kind of shortchanged the Scorpion and Sub-Zero characters in the 95 film, but only 2 games had been out by that point. There wasn't as much history yet. That's first of all. Second of all, had they done the second movie right and had the same team on board instead of getting a completely new team of subpar individuals because a sequel was like rushly greenlit,
yeah,
they probably would have been able to have both of those characters return in a more appropriate fashion and flesh them out better. But we just didn't get that opportunity.
yeah,
And that's I believe why so many people were looking forward to this movie, the new one, because the second film back in 97 was such a massive disappointment. It actually kind of not only left a bad taste in people's mouths, but even kind of tainted the memory of the first film because it picks up right where the first one leaves off. And
really, really, really jarringly.
yeah,
So
yeah,
that's why I think I would say that give anything a chance that comes around. I would say at least in a chance when to kind of improve, especially if like you like love this franchise. So
yeah. I'm a
I
fan.
would even give it a
Yeah,
chance if it
you know,
came around. I wouldn't necessarily go out and see it in the theaters, but as somebody who's just again a casual guy, I would say it could have been done better. But don't ever blame anybody specifically. I think
yeah,
you were right in saying this
the
is kind of
actors
maybe
are,
a group fail.
yeah, the actors I would say are the people least responsible for how poorly this turned out. And as far as I'm concerned, there are some of them, Hiroyuki Sanada, Joe Taslim, they both did a superb job in that movie. It's not their fault that things got cut up in the editing room. They both did really excellent in that. And I've made it a point to say that how good of a job they both did, despite the fact that the film itself turned into a mess because of other people's mistakes.
Yeah.
You know, so
Cool.
I do give credit where it's due.
All right, my friend. Well, I think we can cut it there. And Bobby, thank you so much for joining me in this slightly impromptu version of this. And
No problem.
I hope we
It's
get
nice,
you on.
nice talking about
Yeah, I hope we get you on again.
Yeah, it would be nice, man. We could probably schedule it on a weekend or whatnot. But yeah, hit me up and we can do this on a different topic. Hopefully one that's not as negative.
If you want to hear Bobby passionately talk about training, that is also a topic we did.